Scotland, described by some as the Saudi Arabia of renewable energy. This may seem true, as plans proposed by the government in the run-up to COP26 seeks to double Scotland's onshore wind farms in the next 8 years. By 2030, ministers want renewable energy to account for 50% of demand across electricity, heat and transport. The Renewables UK Onshore Wind Prospectus suggests that approximately 17,000 jobs and the equivalent of 27.8 billion in GVA could be achieved through the deployment of an additional 12 gigawatts of onshore wind capacity. All this sounds great, exciting, ambitious, innovative, and surely the best for the climate and for Scotland. However, as rates of fuel poverty soar across the country, how much money do these onshore wind farms make, and how beneficial are they to the local communities that they build their sites on?
Wind farms, although they're absolutely essential for tackling the climate crisis, they are really disruptive. And you can see why people who've lived in a village or community in the Highlands with, beautiful scenery and rolling hills and stuff, which suddenly get these big mechanical things put on them, you can see why they would be put out by that. Are they embedding themselves in communities, or are they just here to, soak up the cheap electricity that comes from our wind?
You just mentioned community benefit funds. Do you mind just going into a bit of detail about explaining what they are?
When a wind farm developer or a business decides they want to build in Scotland, they will put in a planning application. One of the things they have to do when they do that is outline how much money they will give to community initiatives, so things like charities. And essentially they're in place because the wind farms don't really provide any economic benefit beyond that. They don't really provide any jobs or anything like that for the community. So it's a way of showing there is a reason to have these on your doorstep.
Do you think having these wind farms, there could be a solution to the cost of living crisis? I know it's going up and up at the moment, but do you think there's a potential there to make it a solution?
We had a whole day of stories in our cost of living series about rent and things like that. That doesn't really affect people in the Highlands as much, but their fuel bills are through the roof. And when you think that they are sort of sitting on basically a gold mine of energy, that doesn't make any sense. There are lots of different structural ways we could try and address that and use wind farms to address that. But the problem is that we don't have any control over the people that own them. So I think one way at the moment, which I don't think is the best way because you're still reliant on these big multinational private companies, is to try and convince them to put more money into communities so that they can do things like make houses more energy efficient.
I read that 70 to 8% of wind farms in Denmark are community owned and they get sold back to them or locally owned. Do you think that's a possibility of happening in Scotland?
Yes, I do think that that's the best way of doing it. But the reason that Denmark can continue to do that is because the community ownership of the wind farms then means that the community have a lot of money, because the problem with wind farms is that they're really capital intensive. So basically you're putting all that money in at the start, but then you get your rewards down the line. So that's difficult for a community because they won't have that upfront money. It would be difficult for community owned initiatives to get off the ground in any sort of scale. That's the difficulty at the moment without sort of some kind of government backing. But there are other sort of bodies that are doing similar things. So I think one really good example is Orkney Council. So basically they've used council tax money to invest in their own wind farms, which then they will then sell the electricity from and use that money then to invest in local services. So there are potentially bodies that could do stuff like that.
Yet, 39 out of the 50 large wind farms in the country are owned out with Scotland, in places like England, Spain, France and China. Calls for more local control over farms are becoming increasingly louder. A report made by Aquaterra on behalf of Point and Sandmick Community Trust on the Isle of Lewis found community-owned farms paid their communities 34 times more than commercially or privately owned farms. It seems like a no-brainer, but it is difficult to put it in place. Richard Kershaw, Soval estate owner on the Isle of Lewis, is currently in talks with the German developer RWE about putting a number of wind turbines across the Lochs region. He explained that he had multiple meetings and consultations with community groups before considering putting the plans in place. He said, "What I want to do is give locals the opportunity to have an input, rather than not doing anything at all." All attendees at the community meetings were all very positive about having wind turbines on the land. He believed it was beneficial to the community, as all profits would be split 50-50 with the estate and with the communities the turbines are built on. He further stated that RWE wished to appoint a community officer, for someone to liaise between developers and locals. He was sure that the local economy would be boosted through local employment and energy sold. It is clear that what we can all agree on is knowing the future of electricity is in renewable energy. However, the future prosperity of rural and urban communities must also be considered, and what course of action is taken to make sure they mutually benefit one another.